So colony, I guess, echoes a lot of similar values to Aragon. So I'm not going to kind of repeat a lot of that, but I think there's a couple of really unique characteristics about colonies that may make it a different flavor that some people might be kind of inclined to try out. The two things that I think are really unique to Colony, one, the reputation system, and two, the kind of internal organizational hierarchy and the kind of modularity that's built around that. And the combination of both of those things enables kind of endless freedom and complexity with one, the reputation system organizes itself internally, how it functions. So I'll dive into both of those things really briefly, and then later on, maybe we can get a little bit deeper into it. The reputation system works where essentially anytime the colony pays recent contributions to the colony, and so with both of those variables, you can essentially decouple some things that are normally kind of quite tightly coupled, essentially like ownership and control. And so in the kind of more opinionated version of a colony, or the more kind of canonical version, the white paper version, we talk about these reputation-mediated colonies where the your control in the colony or your ability essentially based on your reputation. So the colony itself is then controlled by the people who are currently contributing to it, as opposed to necessarily the mediated the colony gets fat stack of tokens over all time. Colonies where, and then at the start about the internal kind of domain hierarchy, and it's a really interesting feature there that allows for some really deep modularity. So essentially, you have this top level domain which represents the colony as a whole, and then branching down from that, any number of arbitrary so essentially you have
Awesome. Thank you, Oren. That was great. With Eric. Eric, tell us about DAO Stack.
we have a few successful DAOs on our platform right now, and a growing pipeline. DX DAO is one of them. If you're not familiar, you should check it out. That control Omen and the Mesa decentralized exchange in collaboration with Gnosis. There's Diversify. Their DAO is called the Neck DAO. And then recently Singles DAO launched from Singular DTV. So, I guess our focus these days has been mainly on these types of projects that have a protocol and they're looking to decentralize. Although we have various small DAOs as well, but I'd say most of our effort has been on these projects. We also have a second parallel effort. DAOstack, the company, has another parallel effort called Common. So that's a product that's launching fairly soon, which is geared more towards the mainstream, people who are not familiar with crypto, which is really cool. You can check it out on common.io. And that's going to be a mobile app. Everything's going to be based in fiat, but basically it's a DAO. And so it's going to be really cool. I don't know. We'll see what happens with that, but I'm pretty excited about that because it'll actually allow us to experiment with groups that have no idea what crypto is but want to operate as a DAO, getting paid in fiat, paying in fiat. So it's going to be very interesting. Our more tech savvy interfaces on Alchemy, so you can visit us at alchemy.daostack.io. Yeah, that's about it. Some things people have been saying about our stack. So we have a very modular stack. It's easy to work with. Although one of the downsides is that we haven't spent too much time documenting. So that's kind of one of the challenging points, is getting to learn our stack. Thankfully, we have a community of developers who can help out there. And then, yeah, that's all I gotta say.
Awesome.
Thank you, Eric. Somebody is making this noise. Who are you?
Probably us. Sorry, we need to go on mute. We are driving, connecting to Discord. We are trying to get myself on mute.
You have been muted.
Nice, thank you.
Yo, Russ, you want to talk about DAO House?
Yeah.
Someone with admin settings needs to servo mute them. If you just mute them personally, it doesn't mute for everyone else.
Oh, you guys can still hear the background noise?
Yeah.
Not for Mars, but still for Optimistic.
Probably a bit of background noise where
Oh, server mute. That's what needs to happen.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So if I, can lead in here, glad to join the panel. Ross Campbell, Open Law, and I guess a multi-DAO called The Lab. As well as a project called LexDAO. In my mind, I see these as kind of converting, labels. So projects. If I, a bit more background, I kind of entered the space as a corporate attorney, and I saw the fallout of the DAO and kind of the missed shot that Ethereum had on using smart contracts to make sort of venture investments, that were open to anyone in the world and super transparent, super effective, money in hand the moment something gets executed. And on the open law side, in the LAO, watching Moloch DAO framework kind of emerge at the woodwork to address a very modest use case of having a sort of club that collects money and makes grants to fund E2 development. We saw that as something we could really seize on as lawyers and kind of extend to the investment use case. And so that's been kind of our focus with bringing Moloch V2 to the market. And you can actually deploy Moloch V2 right now using DAOhouse.club, a DApp and smart contract, maintained by Team Odyssey Automaton and Raidguild, which I just recently joined and very stoked to get more involved with what's happening there and Metacartel. But yeah, in terms of how I think about DAOs and how I think I could now using DAOhouse.club and a DApp their own DAOs and smart contract, it's really just from my perspective, team is not competitive and with Aragon, or which I just recently joined, more very stoked to get more involved. Investment club template and Metacard. I think, but yeah, in terms of how it's going to be different about DAOs, voting modules, or templates that teams kind of select or upgrade into. One thing that I've seen that's been very promising in terms of like inter-DAO, operability and just making things more modular is sort of Aragon, which I just recently joined, more very stoked to get more involved. Investment club and Metacard. I think, but yeah, in terms of voting modules or templates that teams kind of select or upgrade into. Understand it. One thing that often been very promising Aragon DAO, be a member like inter-DAO, they can join operability and just making things more modular tokens for is sort of Aragon, which I just recently joined, more very stoked to get more involved. Investment club and Metacard. All these smart contracts are just about people organizing money and making it easier for them to talk to each other is kind of a cool goal. And I'm seeing a lot of cool fruit there. There's the Inter-DAO Alliance. I think there's a DAO DAOs. So that's kind of the theme that I think is kind of coming to the forefront. And yeah, stoked to be here on the panel. I don't know if that's 5 minutes. I don't have as much to say as the other guys, but yeah, DAOhouse.club if you want to check out Moloch DAOs in the wild. And also LexDAO and Raid Guild, we're also working on upgrading these smart contracts. And in half an hour, we're actually going to talk about kind of that work we're doing there. So I hope some of you guys can stick around. Yeah, cheers.
Awesome, thank you. All right, let's get into the panel then. So, how about Barada? Tell us what's Aragon's what's the best thing about Aragon? The biggest strength.
Well, we have an eagle. Eagles are cool. No, I mean, it's all contextual, right? It's like, it depends on the use case. So for some things, it's going to really make sense to use a colony because you're going to want to have that granular task management. For some things, you're going to want an open permissionless organization that uses a bonding curve and conviction voting. For some things, you're going to want a Moloch DAO for like an investment club. For some things, you're going to want a DAO stack DAO. Like it's dependent on the context. So quote unquote best, it's dependent on where, when, why, who, etc. So I don't know. I like that Aragon gives you flexibility to do a lot of stuff, but honestly, like, yeah, it really just depends on what you're doing.
So what do you think is the main use case?
The main use case.
That's a big question.
Yeah, well, okay, one thing I will say is that there is a lot you can do with a token, a bank account, and a voting app. Like, we're doing lots of cool stuff in the DAO space with all these crazy mechanisms and all this stuff. It's great. I think it's really exciting and awesome. But for most of the world and for most use cases, just having a transparent organization that gives people the right to collectively vote to manage funds without needing to trust an intermediary is pretty, like, groundbreaking, right? So just that alone can solve so many problems in the world. And if we just took that one thing and tried to optimize the UI UX and actually go to market, we could totally change the world. So I would say just the fact that we have that is pretty fucking great. And that's my favorite thing. And everything else on top is a bonus. But really just the tokens, a voting app, and a bank account. That can get you like 80% of the way there in most cases.
Makes sense. I guess it seems like a colony went the other way of rather than managing funds and voting to doing things. Orin, do you want to get into that? Oh, server muted.
Why would it be server muted? Who did that?
Hello?
Hey, you there? Yeah.
All right, cool. Yeah. So in terms of like this, started at the opposite end of the problem in terms of wanting to make it relatively easy, frictionless, and kind of a friendly UI for creating and managing tasks, for essentially allocating funding to a domain and then having people within that domain be permissioned to move funds around. One of the really deliberate design choices, and I mean, if I were to answer Peth, your original question to Barada about like what I think is the best thing about Colony. One of the things I would say there is that Colony, kind of as a design choice, tries to avoid voting wherever possible. And so in the current version of that of the Colony UI, it just doesn't exist at all. And that's kind of a conscious choice to develop the simplest thing to start with and get it out and get it in people's hands. The upcoming motions and disputes feature is kind of Colony's take on voting. And I know a few people on the call here have seen it, seen the kind of prototypes for it. But for everyone that hasn't, essentially it's a kind of lazy consensus implementation. So anyone who has a reputation in the Colony can create a motion to do something, and then there's a cooldown period. And if no one objects to the motion within that period, then it just happens. It just goes through. So there's no need for anyone else to intervene. The default answer is yes, this is okay. And if someone then decides to come and object to it during that cooldown period, that's when you start kicking off kind of voting and dispute resolution. But even in that case, we try to push people down the kind of happy path of not forcing everyone to pay attention to it and vote wherever possible. And then when you do get to actually needing to vote, I talked about the reputation system and the domain hierarchy earlier. This is one of those situations where it comes into play and kind of shines really nicely. So you only need to vote initially in the domain where this dispute was raised. So using the same example from before, if we've got this kind of front-end engineering domain, which is a few levels below root, then it's only the people in that front-end engineering domain that need to actually weigh in on that vote. And then after that vote's happened, if you still feel kind of dissatisfied with it, then you can kind of escalate the dispute up through the domain hierarchy, bringing in a kind of ever-increasing reputation pool of people that need to pay attention to it and vote. The cost of which, though, is obviously a great stake each to essentially compensate the people that you're having to bring into that vote. But yeah, anyway, to get back to the original question on this before I went off on a rant, Colony started off definitely on the opposite end of the problem, trying to kind of optimize for just being able to granularly create tasks and move funding around inside and out of a colony.
Yeah, and I think that kind of touches on a broader theme, which is that as much as possible, it seems like pushing decision-making to the edges seems to be pretty solid, right? So if every member of every DAO had to vote on everything, it would be a nightmare, especially with the gas fees, right? But by pushing decision-making to the edges, the people closest to the problem can deal with that. And then only if there's a reason for that to be escalated, then more and more people, part of the DAO, can get involved. But yeah, that seems like a general trend we're just seeing across the DAO space that seems to be pretty solid.
Yeah, I think so. Like Moloch is another interesting way to handle that. Essentially, just having no quorum, so everyone doesn't have to pay attention to it. It's you can have a proposal that passes with just one share voting on it, and it's only if if people start making noise and saying, "Hey, no, everyone else come and vote no to this. This is a bullshit proposal," that you actually need to then start getting more and more people paying attention to it. So there's definitely a larger design space than just colony solution to it. And so, like you said, I think there's the entire DAO space has had some focus at least on it. So I mean, DAO holographic consensus is another attempt at solving the same kind of problem.
And I would
let's hear.
No quorum on Moloch DAO has been kind of the hacky fix for this sort of issue of it's better to put less in votes and spending gas, and things should be rough consensus at the edges. Simply having no quorum requirement was the way I guess Moloch DAO got there. So, anyways, sometimes less is more.
So good. Yeah, let's hear Eric on DAOstack's voting system, since it's the most intricate.
Yeah, so I didn't really go into that in the pitch, but for those not familiar, DAO stack DAOs use holographic consensus. It allows you to stake on proposals, and then if there's a stake on a proposal, then that proposal only needs relative majority to pass. Otherwise, if there's no stake, you need absolute majority, which I don't think any DAO has passed any proposals just with absolute majority. So essentially, for the most part, if you want a proposal passed, you have to stake tokens on a proposal. It ensures skin in the game, and then you just need, in theory, one person to vote on a proposal for it to pass. So that's holographic consensus. And then in terms of like, yeah, what was the question? What was there a specific question you're asking about?
Not really, generally about voting mechanisms.
Yeah.
I
mean, I don't know. There's a few different options out there, and holographic consensus, we've definitely been rethinking it recently, just because the high gas fees, and trying to think of how we can address that. Because with holographic consensus, you need 4 interactions with the blockchain, and with the gas fees, that gets really expensive. So we've been thinking about other options, but yeah, it's a challenge with the gas fees, which is a whole other variable out there.
Right.
But I think that projects that are using it are enjoying it. It acts like a safety mechanism, where people actually have to pay in order to or someone has to put skin in the game in order to get a proposal to pass. And it does seem to work quite well, especially for larger DAOs that are seeing quite a bit of proposals like DXDAO. It just ensures that none of the bad proposals ever get there to a point where they can actually get passed. But it does seem to be working.
And would you say the holographic consensus is then the main selling point of DAO stack, or is there something more?
No, I think it's a very modular platform, similar to Aragon, where you just have these different plugins and the DAO is upgradable. So yeah, I would say that it's more just the framework itself, that it's a modular platform that has plugins and works out of the box. And I guess the other aspect is that just our basic DAO is reputation based, and has this native token, which we think is a very good model for all sorts of DAOs. So yeah.
We could touch on the reputation a bit. How does the reputation work in DAO stack?
So it's pretty flexible. So at a very basic level, when you launch your DAO, you can mint reputation to whoever you want when you launch it. But then after that, you can issue reputation through proposals. So if you do some work, you can ask for reputation. So it's very flexible. But then also you can build plugins to do more elegant things. So we have a plugin where you can lock tokens and receive tokens, or receive reputation proportional to the amount of tokens you locked. Yeah, it's extremely flexible. So any reputation can just be a representation of something else if you want it to be, or it can just be voted by proposals.
Okay. And was reputation transferable, or was that just gen?
Yeah, reputation is non-transferable.
Right. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Dorian, do you want to tell us more about the Colony's reputation system?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the kind of really unique characteristic of it, compared with other reputation systems, for the most part, is the decay function. So the fact that it's calculated on this kind of layer 2 network based on the native tokens that you own, and then it decays over time. So you need to continually contribute to a colony in order to maximize your reputation, or in order to kind of maintain even your reputation in that colony. And so again, in the kind of white paper version of a colony that is fully reputation mediated, then that means to kind of maintain your influence in that colony, you need to continuously contribute to the colony. And that's a really deliberate decision to essentially decouple kind of ownership and control in a colony. So control of the colony is in the hands of the people that are active to it, even if there is still some I guess disproportional reward associated with kind of owning, and that's, I guess, ownership there is maybe the wrong word, but with having a big fat stack of native tokens for the colony. And what I'm getting at there is the colony also has this rewards distribution mechanism where you can make kind of, I guess, dividend-like or kind of profit-sharing, revenue-sharing-like payouts that are proportional to your native token and reputation balance. Those payouts, they find kind of a happy middle ground between people who have contributed early to a colony or contributed, and people's current contributions to a colony. And I guess to dive a little bit deeper into what I mean by that, it's essentially the amount of a reward distribution claim is proportional to the geometric mean between your native token balance and your reputation balance relative to the geometric means of every other contributor who's claiming in that reward distribution. So again, it aims to find this kind of happy middle ground between rewarding the people who were there from the start, who have a huge fat of tokens, and the people who are actively contributing to it right now. In contrast to the kind of typical, I guess, like equity model where rewards are very, very heavily weighted towards the people that got in early, as opposed to the people currently building value.
Right.
Quick question there on the native token. So with a colony, right, you can say there's already a token wild. You can say, hey, I'm going to build a colony using this token. You can use the colony to like have a way for people to allocate that token, I think.
Yep.
And can you also just launch a colony from scratch and have it create a token for you? Can you do both?
Yes, you can do either. So it's essentially any token can be used as the native token for a colony. You can use an existing token. You could go and pick DAI or something like that if you wanted to, or you can spin up a brand new token when you create the colony. And the choice that you make there is pretty impactful on kind of how the colony operates. I guess to dive into that briefly, if you were to pick DAI, for instance, as your native token, I think that's a really interesting choice. It means that it kind of ties the reputation in your colony to the US dollars that your colony was willing to pay you to do things. So that makes your reputation really easy to interpret. Makes it kind of more meaningful than it might otherwise be. But it also means that your colony has to ensure a revenue model in DAI. If it ever runs out of DAI, then it loses the ability to issue reputation or to kind of distribute reputation. It also exposes you to kind of any systemic risk in that token. So if you pick something like DAI, or if you pick another token that has potentially kind of more risk involved with it, then you're exposed to that risk. Or if you pick a token that's highly volatile, then you are exposing your reputation balance to that volatility. So those things are all really important to consider if you're thinking about kind of importing an existing token into a colony as the native. And then if you were to spin up a token, you kind of have the opposite set of problems. So you have the token that you picked has no economic model, or you have to kind of engineer why it would be, what its use case is, engineer kind of the reasons why you would go and mint more of it, why you would kind of distribute it to and all that kind of stuff. So there's a bit more kind of upfront work in figuring out how and why this thing's worth anything to someone, and how you want to go about kind of creating rules around when it's minted and all that kind of stuff. So both options are useful in different cases. I kind of tend to steer people towards creating a new token if they're on the fence, just because it has a bit more flexibility. You can always kind of set up rules to allow for some kind of exchange for some other token if you decide that, okay, we do actually want this thing to be pegged to the US dollar or something like that. But for projects that already have a token and know exactly that they want that to be what is tied to the reputation in their colony, then yeah, it makes a lot of sense to just import that token rather than adding another token to the mix that could potentially confuse their user base.
Cool.
Right. Makes sense.
And Pete, I don't know, did you have another thing you wanted to drop in?
No, I wanted to ask you next, actually. I mean,
okay.
Aragon doesn't really have a native reputation system, but there's workarounds, right?
Yeah, so actually kind of wanted to touch on this before, is that it's interesting that I would say like decaying reputation or decaying power in a system and inflating the system itself and redistributing power are kind of like two sides of the same coin, right? So if you have a DAO or system that says, hey, reputation is the root authority or the way to make decisions and stuff here, right? And that decays over time, and so you have to stay engaged to continue to maintain reputation, to stay relevant and have a say in the org. Okay, cool, that's great. And that works awesome. And it's great. Another way to do that, though, is to have an inflationary token model. In that case, what you're saying is, hey, there's a distribution model here, and at a regular interval, the token supply increases, and maybe it just increases because, or maybe there's a specific policy that when people do certain actions, they get more tokens. Who knows, right? But it's inflationary. And so if you just get a bunch of tokens and hold them, you will slowly be diluted over time. And Bitcoin does this, Mangala does this, SourceGrid does this. Like a lot of systems do this, right? Even if they're not quote unquote DAOs or whatever. But the main thing there is that if you want to maintain your proportional share of the network or the DAO or whatever, you have to keep engaging and doing the thing that the DAO says is worth getting the tokens. So it's kind of another way to address it that we see a lot of systems using. Both are great, and depending on your use case, one might be better than the other. But yeah, it's kind of a way to address that problem of making sure that people who engage with the system and contribute real value have a voice and stake in that system.
I think that's a really valid thing. Criticisms that the reputation system has received from a number of people is that you can achieve effectively a similar thing by just inflating your token supply. And Colony, if you have a native token where the Colony is periodically minting new native tokens and paying them out, then you're kind of you're diluting people's influence in the Colony with two separate mechanisms there. One, just by the dilution of the token, and then two, by the reputation decay. So yeah, just wanted to kind of echo that. It's actually about, it's just very, the simple just kind of dilution of the token supply, or at least your relative token supply is can effectively do the same kind of thing as a reputation decay function.
Makes sense. All right, we got 10 minutes to go. Do we have any questions? Or we haven't heard from Ross much?
Yeah, I think everyone here is doing a really good job of, eloquently summing up the issues at hand and how DAOs are kind of solving them by using soft consensus, providing context for a token and kind of, figuring rights out at the edges. There's not too much that, the Moloch DAO framework offers here, other than kind of our sense is that a lot of people that want to use blockchain smart contracts for organizations are often, trying to do grants. They're trying to do token investments, and the Moloch DAO framework is very well tailored to that. I think Colony, DAO Stack, Aragon are very good ways to launch DAOs if you don't have a preconceived notion of what your organization is going to prioritize. And then you can see how it can organically evolve from that by sort of downloading new apps. But yeah, I think these problems also all kind of come down to the issue of, how much are people willing to pay to have a vote, and gas costs are kind of exclusive there. One thing that I think would be cool for us to kind of share notes on this call, between the different DAO frameworks, is how can we kind of communicate using different chains, side chains. I've seen that, Aragon and OneHive organization particularly have used XDAI as a place to kind of launch an Aragon DAO, record votes, and move assets basically for free, but still have that sort of root security on Ethereum. And that's probably going to be, the future of how this all happens. It seems like the only layer one use case that I see kind of standing out for a little while longer is kind of the investment use case, where it really makes sense to, pay to be counted, to pay a lot in gas fees, and kind of coordinate on game theory, because you're moving around millions of dollars in assets, and you want it to be very simple. But yeah, that's kind of my sense, and I'm curious what others on this call think about using other chains, maybe a Polkadot, Parachain. What are your approaches? I'm sure everyone's hearing about gas costs from their users.
I'm a big fan of Rhistones. You just say it's there, and then it's there, and that's the end of it. But other chains are cool too. We could do that, if we're gonna have the data, then yeah, But yeah, no, I think the point being minimizing voting is a pretty great thing. In that most people want the power and ability to vote, but they generally don't want to actually have to vote. And so for most people, and this doesn't apply to every context, but for most people, what is an ideal system is a system that represents their interest without them ever having to lift a finger or do anything. So if we can achieve that in some way, and I think 0% quorum helps, achieving rough consensus helps, giving people the option to voice and or exit, like Moloch DAO does this really well, right? You can voice via vote, you can exit via rage quit or kick. And so that balance of power just makes it so naturally everyone knows that everyone else can do that, so then everyone acts accordingly. Systems like this that make it so that optimal decisions just kind of happen without people having to put in a lot of effort are great. As much as we could move decision making to the edges, either to the edges of an organization or to the edges of a network by using side chains, layer 2, etc., the better.
Yeah, I really like the colony stuff where you kind of minimize voting as much as possible. Because even if you separate out gas costs just for a minute, I think that we're going to get a lot of we're seeing a lot of people, a lot of experimentation on XDAI and these other networks. I think we're going to see more of that. But I think that trying to think more about how we make decisions without having to turn everything into a vote is going to be a big win, because it causes a lot of friction, and it's one of those things that it's a real bottleneck on how much you can scale DAOs and scale decision making if everyone has to vote and stuff. So I'm really interested to see a bit more about the colony stuff. I'm really love to see some of that disputable stuff, Aaron, as well.
Yeah, totally. If you wanna, I can shoot me a DM. Otherwise, it'll be up and running in the next couple of months. Fingers crossed. So everyone will be able to play with it then. The gas costs right now are definitely hurting colonies, as I'm sure that they're hurting kind of all of the DAO projects right now. So I think minimizing voting is obviously a great thing. Looking at solutions on kind of layer 2 chains is something that I have been pushing us to explore a little bit as well. We haven't gotten particularly deep into those explorations yet, because we're very, very focused on the kind of core functionality, particularly getting this voting stuff wrapped up and delivered to kind of get Colony to a point much more of a community-led, community-run project than it is right now. But there's some really interesting technologies that are kind of coming online. It seems like several of the kind of roll-up technologies are all coming online kind of now or in the next 6 months-ish. Matic just came online. Optimism is very, very close to coming online. Apparently, those two are to me. I'd love to see Colony and all of the other kind of experimenting with deployments on those other solutions. Someone mentioned the XDAI network. It's cool to see some deployments on that. I know the Bright ID DAO, they have deployments on their ID chain. So there's obviously some experimentation that's happening already, but yeah, more of that would be great.
One thing I want to highlight that I think is really important is that voting is expensive. Not just the gas cost, but the time. If we were actually to measure the amount of time we spent on votes, actually thinking about them, talking about them, voting on them, the time cost is so much higher. But the thing is, the UI UX is such that the pain of paying happens at the point that you click to make the thing, right? So I think most of us probably make more money per hour or minute or whatever than it costs for the actual gas of the thing. But the fact that you have to click the damn button and it makes you pay, it sucks on a psychological basis. So I think so that's the thing that's really acute and that really sticks with us. But if we really think about the cost of voting, it's the time. It's all the energy that goes into thinking about a thing, talking about a thing, making the decision. And so I think creating systems that reduce the effort required to have good outcomes is really key. I think along with talking about scaling, the actual throughput, we should talk about scaling out the effort required to get to good decisions. It's kind of the point of the whole thing.
Yeah, and so I think there's some really interesting that exists to help that decision making process. One that's been really popular over the last 6 months, 8 months, a year is quadratic funding. Gitcoin grants has been the obvious touch point for most people in the space with quadratic funding. And that's a really, really cool mechanism to do exactly what you're talking about there. Is essentially push decision making to the edges and maybe not kind of do away with the cost of voting, but it reframes it in that you're voting, but your voting is framed as a contribution to the. So there's kind of this expectation of this tangible cost to you, and because of that, you don't have the same kind of resistance to. Obviously, there's some gas involved with that. I think, particularly in Gitcoin grants last round with batch transactions. The gas relative to the amount that you are contributing seems much less impactful. In the same way that you're suggesting the gas compared to the value of the time that you spent deliberating over a vote is probably somewhat irrelevant. But when you frame it in the context of actually making a transaction project, then that cost seems much more palatable. I think another really great mechanism outside of kind of holographic consensus or a kind of limited use case of holographic is futaki. So essentially decision making by prediction markets. And the conditional tokens framework that Gnosis has released. That Omen, the new prediction market, is built on top of, was essentially designed with futaki in mind, designed with enabling futaki. And so I think that's kind of experimentation with that is going to be really interesting over the next, again, 6 to 8 months, maybe a year, to see some more applications start to make use of that as a decision-making mechanism that reframes the kind of cost associated with decision making and actually kind of incentivizes good decision making as opposed to having it be a cost on the people participating.
One thing on the XDAI front, we've been experimenting with XDAI for quite some time. Alchemy is also live on XDAI. We have maybe 4 or 5 DAOs operating there. Yes, it reduces transaction costs, but there's also another cost, which is usability. I mean, XDAI is even less usable than mainnet Ethereum. People have to use a bridge, and so even though it's cheaper, I mean, your paying for it just because it's even less usable. So there's always seems to be a compromise.
Yeah, there's trade-offs, right? And to your point about the like bridging, you kind of just get hit twice by fees because you're bridging on and then bridging back off. So it just depends, I guess, on the use case.
Exactly.
And about the future, we actually have a workshop on it later. And right now we're supposed to start the Moloch and the Moloch Minion workshop. Should we move the workshop into the workshop channel and let people talk about DAOs if they want to keep on talking about DAOs?
Sure, sounds good.
All right, the Moloch workshop in the workshop channel below.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening, everyone. This was a chat.
Yeah, thank you everyone for
everyone. Thanks everyone.
See you.
I'm going to just hang out here if anyone wants to talk colony or futarchy or anything else.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. I really love the new colony system.
Yeah, cheers.
Talked with Jack last week. He gave me the presentation of the new UI. And
nice.
It's really great.
Yeah, I think it's like the kind of path that we took in terms of focusing on task management and getting tasks.
All right, let's wait a second.
Enhance.
While we're waiting, though, I want to touch on something Ross mentioned a minute ago, which is that due to the simplicity of Moloch, the gas costs are lower, which is nice. But in addition, due to the simplicity of Moloch, also the conceptual costs are lower. So using Moloch is just pretty damn easy, which is great.
Mental model.
Yes,
totally.
So it's like cheaper on the financial front as well as the UX front.
So that is kind of the interesting part of how game theory applies here, because DAOs are just about people signing transactions to make decisions under some rules. It could be a legal agreement between the DAO members, or straight up the hard-coded voting smart contract, which has like membership limits, time periods, all that fun stuff. But yeah. It's about people, and when you have artificial constraints, like you see in Moloch DAO, where it's really only going to do one thing, it's going to get money in, it's going to allow people to take their ball home, and it's going to send money to other accounts. You can kind of have a quick turnaround on decisions, and what I see as kind of streamlined voter participation, because people don't feel like they have to do as much diligence because it's only one type of decision being made routinely by this DAO. They're not doing a lot of decisions. They're not having a lot of evidence proposals. transactions. So I do wonder, if that simplicity lens what Bra is talking about, where it's like the gas costs are low and also the mental costs. But anyways, I think I'll be able to move through this slide now. My computer woke up. So, presentation, it's largely about, getting more people involved and building DAOs. And when I say building DAOs, building smart contracts that move money when people make decisions. And kind of what I think is always fun in this exercise is to take a step back and say, what the hell is a DAO anyway? I think the last call was very helpful here. And it's really just a kernel that makes decisions easier. And particularly, when information is money and that money lives online, people making decisions online has real impacts. And it's pretty revolutionary. But, to get back into that sort of framing discussion, the most simple DAO in my mind is straight up an ERC20 token balance, or even not even a ERC20 token, just a list of accounts and weighted balances that identify, maybe different powers of those people on that balance. You see that, with Aragon, they have a voting token, they have a treasury app, they have things called apps. But what I see in this sort of dynamic is, once you start with a group of people that are identified together, you can kind of go crazy in figuring out what a DAO is. And it's really just going to be ways to optimize what those people are trying to do together. So don't overthink it, and just make it easy and cheap. And cheap has two meanings here, and kind of what Barada's talking about. There's, cheap saving money, spending transactions on Ethereum, but also cheap in the sense of what does it take to actually get shit done? And sort of reducing the sort of cognitive load of making decisions in a DAO or in any organization, really. So kind of on the scene, the Moloch DAO story, I think, is very interesting. And I think a lot of cypherpunks and coders are kind of flocking to Moloch DAO as sort of a flag effort to sort of distribute the development of this very important core use case of Ethereum, which is voting kind of and moving assets with digital organizations. The DAO use case, that famously blew up. And Moloch DAO was kind of tackling not philanthropic use case, but a sort of effort, grant making to make Ethereum more valuable, in a more useful network use case vis-a-vis Ethereum voting and moving. And we can all see the light at the end of the tunnel. It looks like this research has sort of paid off, in many different ways. Kind of where Moloch DAO is relevant is, there are a bunch of different ETH whales in the community, people who have large stakes in Ethereum development going forward and being open, who are kind of spraying and praying with research. And it didn't seem like there was, a lot of quality or focus to the whole idea of let's upgrade the network and let's not have any one agenda or any one company kind of lead that. So Moloch, launched by Amin Soleimani and James Young, they kind of coded it in a sprint, but really their goal was how can I it didn't seem like convince people with a lot of money who are very skeptical of the idea of pulling this money together and voting and having it kind of not under the control and how do we actually make this happen? How do we get them to fund ETH 2.0? And the idea of rage quitting, where on the kind of back end of the relationship, you can always leave, actually encourages you to enter into that relationship. So that was kind of the cool innovation in the sense that Amin and other people promoting this very simple smart contract to fund research. They're saying, what do you have to lose? You put your money in, it's a grant, it's not a security, but if you hate the decisions we're making, you can always leave, and programmatically, you're going to get your money back. Here's the code, it's only 400 lines, so you're not going to have to get a team of people to kind of understand it and work out all the angles. And one cool thing that I think is really relevant to the people in this call that want to learn how to code DAOs is they use a kind of common library that almost all Solidity coders know about, the Open Zeppelin contracts, and they just added a simple extension of voting. So you're not going to have to get kind of the Open Zeppelin ownable, safe math, and all these things come together to do something really cool, which is funding ETH2 research. That I think is really relevant. Again, the lesson here is stay focused on a specific goal, common library that almost kind of what I was saying the other call was to fund research, but kind of what we see that has been important is that this code has been hacked. It stayed afloat for over a year, holding a bunch of money, and this sort of kind of blesses the idea that you can actually, anyone can start building DAOs for the community. You don't have to use Aragon, you don't have to use DAO Stack, even though they're very, very good frameworks. The field is still wide open. Where we can see a lot of help is on the Moloch DAO framework is, hey, we have this core kernel of code that does one thing very well. It takes in money and makes decisions about where it should go. Let's make it cheaper, and let's add more choices. And Deacon Brown is on this call, and is also going to present. We'll talk more about the Minion framework that kind of addresses that layer. We can see a lot of help. Kind of, I already hashed this out. Moloch DAO started as a grant making the smart contract. Last year, the OpenLaw team and Metacartel Ventures and a bunch of other people in the community that kind of are a fan of this code decided to make it a bit more like an investment club, kind of embrace that model. And we added a way to enforce member agreements through Rage Quit. So, if you have somebody in your DAO who is suddenly OFAC sanctioned or otherwise breaking your operating agreement and just being a nuisance and increasing the liability of that association, you can say, sayonara, we're going to kick you out, and it's going to be programmatic. You can't, kind of embrace that model. Also, obviously, it was a given that if we're going to have Moloch DAO work and make investments, it needs to be able to support multiple tokens and be a sort of bank of all those tokenized investments. Full pattern instead of, when a vote process, this is money spits out, it's way more to draw money out of DAO than to have it spit money out. Also, obviously, the simplest way is to send a plausible token and to make a vote freeze when that token is paused. And then basically that really is a simple investment fact vector that pattern instead, we kind of and this full payment money sort of design. One note I would make, to Solidity coders is that I think the token attack is very unlikely because members are going to study each token that comes in, but it's so powerful that even though it's unlikely, you got to address it. So that's kind of the seesaw of triage. Is like something that's unlikely but will literally kill your DAO is like you definitely got to prioritize. But one note that should go without saying. Is that Moloch, represents minimalism and unlikely because kind of the proof is in the pudding because I'm just a normal lawyer who started coding Solidity a few years ago, and I'm able to call myself a DAO coder because I can very easily add extensions. I can work from Open Zeppelin contracts and just on the Moloch DAO, and anyone can kind of understand what I'm doing. And in the wild, we have several, I think, key deployments from this venture fund use case. The DAO it has over $1 million worth of wrapped ether in its bank. Metacartel Ventures is also killing it, making tons of important investments. DAO House and Pokemol provide interfaces and a sort of registry of Moloch DAOs in the wild. And more recently, we've seen Democracy Earth start to track Moloch DAOs and the membership decisions and kind of what's going on there. So yeah, there is a sort of organic, vanguard of people that are using Moloch DAO in interesting ways, validating the code, making sure it's secure, and also just making it fun to be in these interfaces and it's making it more visual. And more recently, V2X, I'll briefly mention, is an effort by members of Lex DAO and Raid Guild to make the Moloch V2 a bit easier to use for members. So one of the things we did was instead of having a single summoner sort of add people as they pledge to the DAO, you can have something called a summoning circle. And it's making people start out as DAO members, and then they can actually start buying in at a set rate and purchase shares directly from the DAO without having to go through a member proposal process. So that's one optimization that we were able to do very, very quickly. And all the code's open source, and you can see how quickly we've moved there. Just a unprofessional team sort of extending the code and having very, compliant results. And yeah, we also have borrowed greatly from Raid Guild's Minion framework, which I think approximates what Aragon Agent can do by having arbitrary function calls triggered by the votes of a DAO. So basically why this is significant is, Moloch DAO, like I said, is very simple. It's a kernel that takes money in securely and allows it to be dispersed very predictably. But, what if you want to interact with a different smart contract? You're not just sending money to a team's wallet. I think you want to make a deposit and maybe get some governance by having tokens in return. Function calls triggered the Minion smart contract allows you to do that. And NIP also allows you to join Marathon DAO. Like I said, allows you to join any other DAO. So it's kind of cool. That sort of simple upgrade that has happened, not directed by any team or any, given interest. It's just people are responding to users. And I'll turn it over to Deacon, who I think is going to talk about the secret sauce. Smart contract allows you to do that. And NIP also allows you to join Marathon DAO. Like I said, allows you to join any other DAO. Can you guys hear me? That sort of simple upgrade that has happened, not directed by any team. Interest people are responding to users. And I'll turn it over to Deacon, who I think is going to talk about.
Should I take over the screen?
That makes a lot of sense, actually. Yeah, let's do that.
Okay.
So I'm just going to back out.
Did that work? Can you see my screen?
Yeah. I think I lost control. Yes. Sweet.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay.
Just let it happen.
So you guys can see my screen right now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
All the things.
So yeah, just quickly kind of on the Moloch and how it's being used in some of the success cases we've had, and even in DAOs in general. It's it's a really new thing, and people are experimenting with it in all different kinds of ways. One of the things I like to say is it's like D&D, not DAO, so a recursive acronym, but because it is it's like a group of people all over the world that get together, and it's a way for them to trust each other, and lower the coordination cost of gaining that trust. It adds that trust layer. There's skin in the game with a Moloch. So usually in a Moloch, you would stake some money up front, although you can also exit at any time with that money. That kind of thing both creates engagement because you've staked money into this, so you're very involved with it now, and also gives you an exit, so you can leave if you ever feel like the group is not going like you want, and that gives you a way to trust other people because they've all gone through the same thing. And what this really promotes is this these because it is it's like a group of people all over the world that get together, and because a DAO in most cases is a very kind of flat organization to trust each other. You run into the benefits and the problems of having kind of this type of organization. There's no one leader there to tell everyone what to do. So to be a member of a DAO in most cases also means that you're probably a person that is very, believes in being self-sovereign and being a self-starter. If you just like being told what to do, it's probably not the thing for you, because it really does take another level of engagement, but it's much more rewarding. This quote is one I like. It's like, complexity theory holds that near chaos is the most active and most creative state. So that's really true. You're on the edge of chaos, and that's when really interesting things start happening, and you have to kind of embrace that, right? So Raid Guild, which spun off of Metacartel and some other things, these were things that were never in the long-term roadmap, but they just started bubbling up, and it was like, okay, let's just see where this goes. Let's do it. Let's DAO it. So no gods, no masters. The Moloch contract is an interesting case because it was a couple open source developers, and Amin and James Young and team put together this kind of minimum viable DAO, released it at ETH Denver, and there isn't one company behind it. So it's all been just different groups coming together and working on this and just hacking away on it. And so everything that's come out of these Molochs, all the Molochs now, like the Metacartel Ventures and the LAO and these things that have millions of dollars in them, all were spurned just from this open source release that happened a year and a half ago. Metacartel, LexDAO, Moloch Mystics is now the guys that Ross was talking about, the team up between LexDAO and Raid Guild. And then Democracy Earth is doing some amazing things with discoverability and stats. And DAO House is the project which will help you deploy DAOs. So, so Raid Guild and the Minion. So Raid Guild is another DAO. It's kind of this team of Web3 devs and product people that have all joined together to kind of work on projects and have fun doing things. And I kind of look at it as like an infinite DevCon or something. You know, everyone's meeting up, hanging out, talking about new technology, talking about how to work on it, making deals, working on projects together. And so all this is happening in this crazy, chaotic world in Raid Guild. And so if that's something that's interesting to you, come check us out. So the Minion is a project that we built in Raid Guild. And the idea was, you know, like Ross was saying, it's like the agent on Aragon. It basically allows a DAO to make a proposal or an arbitrary contract call through a proposal. So, you know, it's really flexible and it has a lot of kind of interesting use cases. A few we've played with in Raid Guild so far is a ENS registrar, and which allows like any DAO member, if you're in a Moloch DAO, you can claim a subdomain of a root ENS domain. And then you could also ask for a subdomain off of that root domain through a proposal. So besides that, it's only to members. And another thing that we're working on right now is some escrows. So like in Raid Guild, we do client work sometimes. And so having an escrow is nice, and we can deploy that through a Minion proposal so the DAO knows what's going on, and then we can use that escrow to actually manage client money. So there are a couple bounties that are going to be working with the Minion. These are sponsored from DAO House. Let's see if I can just click over to it. The kind of cool thing with the Minions is it's so flexible, and if you're kind of a bounty hunter in this hackathon, you could probably combine it on with some other things. So you could take the Minion contract and, you know, add it to a price oracle from Chainlink, or connect it to Colony, or, you know, whatever the other bounties that are up. You could probably figure out some good mashups there. We have one bounty that's going to be for $1,000. It's a pool, so whatever, like really just interesting, cool things that people think of, like be totally creative and just do whatever sounds cool. Like, and then we have some kind of boost to those too for a few things we'd like to see in DAO House. One thing is like the decentralized DAO metadata store, where a DAO can actually vote. So say something as simple as like the DAO's name or its description or something. Because it's a DAO and you don't have one central person that's pressing the buttons, you need a way for the DAO to kind of make these decisions and push changes. So this could be something up on IPFS, and then you go through a Minion proposal to save the hash an event or something like that. You know, it could be a lot of different things. Take advantage of 3box or Airweave or other IPFS type tools. Another one would be like a fun one would be an NFT gallery for a DAO. So a DAO could use the Minion as actually a place to hold NFTs and sell them. And then the profits would go into the Minion, and then the DAO could retrieve those profits at any time. You could do so ERC 721 kind of gallery. There's like an OpenSea embedded market. There's things like that. You could do some interesting things. And then our last bounty here is just more on ideas of DAOs in general. So if there's like a current community that seems perfect for this, or if there's just an interesting idea you have, then we'll be giving out some bounties for that. If you go to the Minion repo, you can see the contract. It's a very simple contract. It's basically how it works is it saves a transaction, like stages it basically, and then the DAO makes a vote. It's linked to a proposal that staged transaction. If the proposal passes, then you can execute that transaction. So it's not too complicated. It's I don't know, maybe 30 lines of code, and it's but it is very flexible and powerful. So that's why it's just kind of like we got this open bounty just to play with some of these ideas. There's also some cool things just on that contract that could be done, because we did this as a proof of concept, kind of just for fun, and there's a small front end here too that's built in Vue, so you could build on top of that front end for any of these kind of Minion plugins, or you could build your own front end. There's also on the contract, there's some things that I was thinking would be neat, like more conditional kind of Minion proposals. So right now it's conditional on a proposal passing, but you could also add other conditions. Maybe the Gnosis conditional stuff would be cool here, or maybe a price oracle, or maybe looking.
DAO. You can actually create sort of a joint minion. There's so much you can do here. Not to cut you off, Deacon, but
yeah, totally. Like you could go off of like block number, like make a vesting contract or something, or you could look at the how much funds. You could say like when the funds in the bank go to 0, then you can release these tokens or something. So there's some interesting kind of chaining you could happen if you added conditional. Another really cool thing for the Minion would be batched transactions. So right now it can be a little burdensome because it's like, oh, I want to do this with this token, but I got to approve it. So now you actually have to do 2 transactions, or maybe write like a second contract that batches those transactions. But there's some interesting things that you could do around that. Then to go on just to our other project, DAO House, which is sponsoring these bounties. They are going to be releasing some new updates to their front end over the next week or 2. Some really cool stuff coming, so check that out. It's a great place to go and like discover current DAOs, what's going on, and to summon your own. Right now with the gas prices, you're probably looking at between $30 and $50 to summon a DAO. But really, like what Barato was saying earlier, like that cost is not crazy when you think about what you're getting and what it might cost to build an organization that's a worldwide organization, and that kind of paperwork, time, and money that would cost. So yeah, DAO House, it's a no-code platform. Call it Magic Internet Communities, based off of Molex, and built totally grassroots fashion through open source communities and grants, sweat equity. So it's a cool thing to check out. You can check me out at Deacon Bro. And then the last little bit about DAO House for the devs is that all our data is on the graph, and there's 2 super cool subgraphs here that we've set up. One that can give you any Moloch DAOs, like proposal history, vote history, member data, and another one which is actually stats, and that's more based on like transactional history. So you can see, how many times people rage quit, and different more like at what block number and different things like that using subgraph. So with that, I think I don't know if we're over time or way under time, but I think it's probably good just to open up some questions. And
perfect half hour. Yeah, yeah, that was great.
Yeah, awesome. So one thing, I have a kind of question comment. It's a bit of both. So you're describing all the things you can do with Minion, right? And there are many things. And it sounds like some of them involve actually changing the architecture of a minion itself, like forking it and creating a custom minion. And some might be like specific kind of like plugins and things like the forged tools, I think it's called, whatever that is, right? But essentially, this kind of allows you to then create like almost like recipes or little like mechanisms for things, and then have kind of like a library of those. So then people can take these mechanisms when someone's built one and then plug it into their thing, which kind of creates like a little like app store for DAO use cases, DAO stuff. So I guess just wanted to confirm that that is kind of like what's going on, right? Is like people can create these use cases and things, but they're really kind of creating these like modular mechanisms that will then kind of like open up the field of what these DAOs can do. Is that right?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So the minion is just a one-off contract. A DAO could have multiple minions. Each one could be like serving a specific purpose. And I think, we'll probably just start a new repo just for the minion contract, because there could be so many different like cool little plugins. One of the things that we're wanting to do in DAO House is create an incentive model for devs just to write plugins for DAO House and for the minion. So this is just like it's really fun to hack on DAOs. So if you're new to it, then it's just gonna be fun.
And if people want to learn about kind of how that works, so they want to get involved with hacking on Minion, what's the best place for people to go to ask questions or to learn about minions and stuff?
I think if you hop over into the Raid Guild's Discord, our public channels, there's going to be a lot of people that will be able to help. Another kind of bonus of that is that Raid Guild has its own bounties that are sponsored from Gitcoin. And so you may be able to do another one of those like multiplying bounty hunter things which we all do at hackathons, and add another thing. I think we have some good ones now, and with price oracles and Chainlink, and the bonus of that is if you're part of the Raid Guild Apprentice program, which is basically just like do a hackathon project and then you can get into Raid Guild. You will be paid for, even if your hack loses, you get paid a little bit.
I think it'd be cool, Deacon, to actually go a bit deeper into how Raid Guild uses Moloch DAO shares to compensate people and arrange contributions and stuff. I think it's a very cool.
We use the Moloch in a little different way than it's been the normal grant giving kind of idea behind the Moloch. We use our shares in more of a reputation sense, and so the way it works is to join Moloch or to join the Raid Guild is 10 shares, which is 1 WETH. Once you're in, there's no other way to get shares except for doing work. So you're either doing work for internal projects for Raid Guild or you're doing work for external projects. It's all through crypto payments, so we can keep treasury and manage all of that. And then with whatever you're paid, you can buy back or you can buy more shares. And that's the only way to get more shares. So your shares will go up as you do work. And you're putting more money in. Still all rage quittable at any time, but so the people that have been around longer have more shares because they've done more work.
Thanks for the summary. And I think, one thing I just highlight here is that, with Raid Guild, we're seeing a freelancer guild use case built around Moloch DAO. And then elsewise, as I mentioned, earlier, we had the Lao, Metacartel Ventures. They're showing how that code is being used to make investments. So I think we have some, pretty cool horses out, to race. And I hope developers just build on, these sort of use cases that have surfaced. Like I said, freelancing and investment, and kind of go nuts with Minion and really help build more interfaces to do cool stuff with Moloch DAOs. The smart contract code base is very small. It's ripe for extension. There's a lot of valor that can be gained, I think, for fresh Solidity devs to build on the Moloch DAO code base. So please come talk to Raid Guild, swing by LexDAO, lexdao.chat, talk to our Solidity coders there. Really just excited to upgrade and get more eyes on this code. So yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and it is so flexible, and you bring up that we have these new use cases coming. And I think there's just going to be more. We're experimenting actually right now with DAO House, making DAO House a product DAO. So and that's what I was talking about incentivizing developers to develop on it. And so there's some really kind of cool things happening around this because it is so simple and extensible.
Awesome.
Questions?
Yeah, the Aragon workshop has been moved, so you actually have 20 more minutes to talk about whatever you want. Questions, or if you want to get deeper into the bounties, or yeah.
Any questions from people that have stuck with us?
I mean, I'd like to dive deeper into the actual code base of Minion, but I don't know if that's appropriate for this talk or not.
Yeah, I thought that was going to be about.
Yeah, I had no idea what this was going to be about. So, sorry I went down and talked about community a little bit, but I do think it's important and does.
Really like the staging transactions summary. That's really what it is. It preps a transaction that talks to Moloch DAO. If it sees that a vote passes, then the minion will actually execute that transaction. But yeah, the code base is only 50 lines of code or 30, whatever you said, Deacon. We can just kind of eyeball that on the screen or something.
Let's see if I. There's actually, I see some contributors on this call, so some people have already took a look at this. So right now, this is kind of wrapped inside of our front end too. A Vue front end, but like I said, you make your own custom front end. So let's see if I can this up maybe. Yeah, it's like super simple. We have a struct here that's storing an action, which stores the data that's going to be executed.
I don't see the code. Are you on? Does everyone else see the code? Or...
Oh, no? Okay, hold on a sec. What do you guys see?
I see your screen now, but you just...
Okay, I think I was looking at the wrong one.
There we go.
Nice.
So a struct to store a little data about the transaction, a few events, one if it's been proposed, one if it's been executed. In our constructor, we're basically just saying which Moloch DAO it's attached to, and we're getting some information from that DAO, the deposit token, which is required for making a proposal, even if it's 0. We have a few kind of helper functions here to interact with the parent DAO, and there's a branch right now that adds a few more, but like do withdraw, just to withdraw a balance, the minion could actually receive a balance of tokens from the Moloch DAO and then interact with those tokens somehow. And there's also a cancel added. That was basically because it was annoying if you screwed one up to try to cancel it. So now it's a little easier. Propose action. We're just basically passing in pretty similar to any interface that does these kind of arbitrary contract calls. So probably seen it in Gnosis or Aragon. You can put the contract that you're interacting with, if you're passing any value to it, the actual data that the hex data, this is like the raw data that you're passing into it, and description just to help add some metadata on it.
Quick question here before we move on. So because earlier the withdraw, that's because the Moloch DAO has the pull pattern, right? So the minion actually has to call the function to pull it out. But then propose action is where you're putting in arbitrary code to be executed in the general direction of away, right? So it's kind of like it's like two directions, right? One, it pulls stuff from the Moloch, and the other, it executes stuff to external contracts. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. And we do have a require to block it from making proposals against its parent DAO, because mainly because we couldn't think of a use case for that. But we actually have since then, and in this like project DAO that we're using, but it's still like a very like specific use case. So we're just keeping this one simple. But that, like what you're talking about, Rada, maybe like this library of different types of minions that would be useful.
I think updating voting params is the most immediate use case I can think of, but more, you know, what we thought about with Moloch Mystics and kind of the march towards making it more modular is, you know, maybe all this is on separate contracts anyway. So maybe it's not the parent anymore. But
yeah,
anyway.
Yeah, so Moloch V2X or Moloch V3 may end up being more modular, which then kind of removes the like the simplicity of the current Moloch, but also would make it cheaper and more modular. So yeah, then we're just like storing that, and then there's once the proposal goes through the DAO, and it may be a 2-day process of voting and grace period, or it may be a 2-month process or whatever it is. Once it's passed, then you can return and execute that function basically. So we're just basically checking, you know, that that it's a valid proposal, and then we're gonna go ahead and execute it. It's not doing that many more tests or anything else more complicated. And the reason why this is in its own contract anyways is because this kind of stuff is pretty risky anyways, like calling arbitrary contract calls. You don't know what that other contract could be by a bad actor that's trying to do something bad, but with it in its own, we kind of just keep it in its own little
and in its sandbox.
Yeah, sandbox. I was going to say sandcastle.
Ah, yes.
All right. So, yeah.
And with that too, another kind of quick, I guess this is another one of those question comments. Sorry, I have a lot of these. But like the idea is like with a Moloch DAO, the security model is that anytime you could rage quit, right? So you have that exit. But once you put capital into a minion, you can't rage quit directly out of the minion because that requires another proposal from the minion into the DAO via the saw withdrawal thing, right? But and also, like you said, calling external contracts is very risky because they could do all sorts of stuff. So it's kind of nice in that if you put capital into a minion or whatever, the only thing at risk is that capital inside the minion, not the main DAO. Is that correct?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
If they're cool. Yeah, because of that sandbox, it's kind of its own.
In a lot of ways, it resembles a special purpose vehicle, and that's kind of my lawyer brain at work. But yeah, it is sandboxed or sandcastled, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
What's the easiest way to get like the hex data for interacting with other contracts? Because to me, that's always been like the most complicated part of using the minion. Is like how do I get the hex code that I want for it to talk to Uniswap or talk to an Aragon DAO, etc.
There's a lot of different ways, but the easiest way that I've seen is that you can just like, if you have a transaction you're going to do, look in MetaMask. Can you guys see my MetaMask? Maybe not, but
yep.
There's a data tab and it has your hex data right there.
Oh, cool. So you're just pulling hex data from MetaMask.
Yeah, and then that would go like, and this is in our front end here. We have like, you can select an ABI and then do your normal kind of functions here, and it fills it all out for you and generates that hex data and passes it along. But there's also just this idea of just like adding the raw hex data. So, the Solidity will allow you to do that. You can grab it out of MetaMask, Mu, a lot of different places you can find it, or command line if that's how you work.
Cool.
Just on that, there's a great little tool I just dropped in the workshop. It's hosted at abi.hashhex.org, and it's just a way for you to drop in an ABI, pass it, and then fill out all the parameters, and it gives you the ABI encoded output that you can then drop straight into a transaction.
Love that site. That's how I verify all my contracts on Etherscan.
Yeah, me too.
Ross turned me on to that, and it was a life changer.
Yeah, it's so useful.
Cool. So does anyone think they'll be working on Minion or have any questions? Any ideas?
So I welcome people to look at the V2X contracts and also kind of join the theme of Moloch Mystics and thinking, like Aragon, can we make this all much more upgradable, modular? Can we have adjustable voting settings? How can we thread the needle of maintaining Moloch minimalism, which is its greatest strength, with allowing us to do a lot more, and not having to use, a bunch of different DAOs. How can we keep it all in the Moloch sort of framework? So, I shared that repo in the presentation, but like I said, you can go to lexat.chat. And yeah, I welcome all the Solidity coders. Please join us. Yeah. Any questions?
So one thing, and I think you guys are working on this, but is that when you're putting, arbitrary bytecode, hex data, ABS, whatever, when you're putting stuff into a function and you write a little human readable description and then you click go, unless you actually are going to go verify what exactly it's calling and how to, right? Because that's generally pretty technical knowledge. It's hard to understand exactly what's being called. So is the way that that's being addressed here by those kind of drop-down recipes with the ERC 721, ERC 20, etc., contract calls that have been hard-coded in and verified that do the thing that the screen says it does? And or is there an optimized UI UX flow for not just grabbing the hex data and putting it into the minion, but then verifying before you vote that the thing you're voting on is the thing that it says it is?
Yeah, that's one of the biggest issues. I think every Minion proposal really requires by the DAO a bit of auditing, because there is a potential for even just a mistake to happen. So what we're doing on the front end right now is because we're storing that hex data currently just in the Minion. Actually, we've thought of a different pattern of storing it in the Moloch proposal data, but that's would be in the Moloch V2X, where we've changed details into a bytes 32. But basically, we try to decode it. So I didn't have an example to show you when I was sharing my screen, but if you did make a proposal, it would show in the details for that proposal. We decode it and say, this is a call to an ERC 721 at this address. It's calling the transfer from function. These are the parameters in a readable format, and here's, you can go look at the verified contract on Etherscan to make sure that doing what you think it's doing.
That's super cool. So it's going to do that automatically?
We try to do it now. It doesn't work all the time. There was it was an older library from Consensus that we were using, and it works pretty well. But I'm sure there are some tools and maybe that one you posted, to take the hex data and go back and decode it into human readable parameters.
Yeah, it'd be cool if there's a guide or maybe even a workshop or something explaining to people how they can do it manually, and or kind of just showing them how the current process works. I think that's something that is probably going to be pretty confusing to people. So, yeah. It'd be cool
Yeah,
to
that's
like
a
have
good point, and it's one of the things we're kind of missing all over the Moloch world is good documentation. So if someone wants to is a good tech writer and they want to do something like that, I think it would definitely be up for one of those bounties.
Awesome. Any other questions? Join us. Well, anyways.
Yeah.
Speaking of joining you, is there like a repo or a place where you guys are collaborating on stuff specifically for DAO Hack Month, or is it more in the Raid Guild channel?
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, yeah. In terms of things that I think are best for that Hack Month, I think those bounties that Raid Guild has put together are super on point and would yield a lot of value for everyone in Moloch. So I definitely want to steer attention there. On the Moloch V2X side, I actually already have an auditor in the works. So I'm kind of working on that. But I don't have any specific upgrades in mind for Moloch V3, but I do hope people that want to learn more about Moloch DAO just come talk to me and, talk to other people in Lexdown Raid Guild and, think about things to do. But yeah, those bounties seem like the best thing for this month.
Yep. And maybe Yaler, you could just pitch the apprentice thing real quick on Raid Guild.
Yeah, sure. Happy to do it. So Raid Guild has the apprentice program running right now. Apprentices join the guild and they start hacking on things that they are interested in or want to learn more about with the support of guild members. You can join us just by jumping into our Discord and DMing me. I'll change permissions and get you going on some tasks, point you in the right direction. We're also running a program with Gitcoin right now where they're matching funds on specified projects for hackathons that are being hosted on Gitcoin. So there's a whole list of issues posted up in the Raid Guild Discord, and I'll grab a link for that. Maybe Deacon can drop a link to that. We have a few channels in there that are specifically for apprentices. And so there's issues there, some issues from the Moloch repos that we were happy to take PRs on. There's also issues for the GitHub collaboration or Gitcoin collaboration. And then we'll be looking to help and support any hackers who are forming teams to work on Raid Guild bounties. So that means if you form your own squad for DAO Hack Month, we're there to support and help. So you can ping any one of us who's in this server. Almost all of Raid Guild's in the DAO Hack Month server, but you can bring questions back and forth between both communities. So yeah, if you're interested in that and that's something that you want to take on as an apprentice, I mean, it's like a work at your own pace situation, but that's kind of how we get a feel for people, their interests, their level of skill, and what they want to work on. And then we kind of, that leads to like an interview process that moves you closer to becoming a member of Raid Guild, essentially.
Yeah. So, yeah. If you wanted to become a member, then that's the best route is do a bounty. And if it's a valid submission, then that's a fast track way in besides going through a rather lengthy interview process.
Exactly. Yeah, I just dropped the link there for people who are interested. So feel free to follow through. And just DM me if you have any questions. I got a nice couple docs with some intro information that can help you get started.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
Thanks, guys. Thanks everyone for coming, and
all right.
Thanks, Ross.
Appreciate it, and thanks for helping on the slides, and everyone for sticking for the whole hour. Yeah, stuff.
Amazing,
guys. It was great.
We have another talk coming up in 5 minutes, right, Pete?
Yep. Gnosis on conditional tokens.
Sweet. So the Gnosis conditional tokens, that will start here in 5 minutes. They're going to walk through their bounty. They've got a bounty up for 3,000 DAI, I think, right now. One of the early heavy hitter bounties. So they'll be here in this channel in about 5 minutes, starting up for anybody who's interested in learning about that, possibly starting to work on that as well.
Yeah, then speaking of a perfect one to match with the minion would be some conditional tokens, I think.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Got the guild if you want to tackle that bounty as well.
I'll tell you what would be neat with that is a way for the minion to just participate or have like the minion, participate in prediction market. So minion go on like buy shares in a prediction market. Super cool.
Yeah. Or one of the things I thought would be cool on the minion is this kind of second condition, you know. So if it was just maybe an oracle or using a conditional kind of the same kind of method that the conditional tokens use, that if it returns true or false, then it's okay to execute. So it'd be the passive this other
extra require statement. That's good.
Yeah, that'd be neat. So like essentially kind of importing a layer of Futaki onto a Moloch DAO. That'd be cool.
Yeah.
I like the sound of that. We should probably let Alan talk though, I guess.
Oh man. So I didn't even know I'm supposed to talk about the bounty.
I can talk about the bounty if you want.
Oh yeah, that would be helpful.
But why don't you go ahead and do your stuff first, and then we can talk about the bounty.
Yeah, I'll wait like 3 more minutes because it doesn't start. And is it cool if I record this? I guess I don't know.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's being live streamed also, so it's being recorded.
Oh, okay.
Double recordings never hurt though, in case you want to use OBS.
No, the first part was messed up, but I think it works fine now. Can somebody confirm this? I'll drop the link.
Send me the link and I'll
the link. The general discussion.
Yeah, I just checked. It sounds all clear, so I should be recording live stream over there as well.
Awesome.
Perfect.
Guess I'll share my screen just to make sure that everything works.
Yeah, sounds good. We can get it set up.
Can everybody see my screen?
Loading, yeah, there we go.
Where's the, oh, okay, here we go. All right, so today I'm talking about Futarchy and DAOs and conditional tokens, but we'll get to that later. So first, some caveats. I don't actually know much about DAOs, but throughout this conversation, I'm just going to pretend that I do. Also, don't really know that much about business, but again, I'll pretend that, I know things. So the first thing I want to talk about is kind of the organizations that do exist in the world. So I'm just going to call this the old world, where you might have, say, a corporation. So there are many types of corporations, but I went on the internet, looked for kind of a typical corporation setup, and this is sort of what I got out of it. So with a corporation, you have a bunch of shareholders that own the corporation. So they own shares of the corporation. These shareholders appoint a board of directors that report to the shareholders, and the board of directors write the rules, I don't know, bylaws or whatever. The people there then appoint officers like the CEO, CTO, whatever, C-whatever-Os, that report to the board, and they kind of like manage the corporation. And those officers then, I guess, appoint, though I use the word hire, employees that report to the officers, and then like the employees, finally, they actually do the business of the corporation. So this is a common setup for a bunch of organizations that run businesses or so. You might see kind of a sort of trend there. So when I looked at this sort of situation, I kind of saw a sort of continuum. So on the one hand, you have people associated with the corporation that have a lot of stake in how the business goes. So you might say these are like shareholders. They kind of hold a lot of stake, and if the business is going well, then, or if the business is going well, their shares are worth a lot and happy, I guess, for whatever definition of happy you want to use. And on the complete other end, you have the employees of the corporation who have pretty much everything to do with what happens with the business. So like they're the people actually on the ground doing the things. And so in a sense, you can say they have the most control over the corporation. Though, of course, they're probably, also working for money, and there's a whole bunch of other discussions we had, but in this kind of simplified view, you could kind of see that different players have a different stake in the corporation versus a different amount of control. Now, of course, these groups don't necessarily exist mutually exclusively. So like somebody might occupy multiple parts of this continuum, or a corporation might be structured differently, but in a sense, this is kind of a way you could view the different roles in an organization, like a corporation. So kind of what a corporation is structured to optimize for are kind of two things. On one hand, you want to ask what matters. So like these are value questions. These are like the why, and you might have noticed like there's a kind of chain of reports that go kind of one way towards the stakeholders in the corporation. So like these are like things that talk about what a corporation cares about. It could be like revenue, share value, some other business metrics, like how much stuff they're selling, what's the public sentiment. And then there's also questions about how this data is collected and how to audit this data, make sure it's all correct. And on the control side of the spectrum, you have the question of how. How do we get there? How do we make these things better? How do we grow the organization and execute the mission? So discussions on this side tends to be around like capital equity, agenda, like who to hire, what needs to be done, etc. Okay, so this isn't a talk about corporations. What I came here to talk about is DAOs. So kind of in my mind, DAOs are oftentimes a radical simplification of the accumulated sort of organizational structure of corporations. So with DAOs, you have oftentimes what I see is you have just stakeholders, and they own the DAO. They propose things to do for the DAO to do, and then they vote on these things. So it's just kind of a lot simpler than the structure that I kind of showed for a typical organization back there. So another thing I want to talk about is sort of the amount of control that stakeholders in the DAO have. And so kind of there are maybe two ways stakeholders typically control a DAO. One way I'll say is through the purse. So you have people who want to enter a DAO, and kind of typically a DAO has a sort of governance ownership token thing, a DAO token, if you will. So you can join the DAO just by buying the token. You lead the DAO by selling it. So these are actions that kind of require the power of the purse. So somebody with some capital, I guess, in some sense, crypto assets or whatever to offer, enter a DAO by doing these sorts of things. The other thing that a stakeholder has is a voice in the DAO. So once you're joined to the DAO, you have the token, you kind of are able to direct the DAO by making proposals and control it by voting or staking or whatever with the token. So this is oftentimes the setup I see in DAOs. So with that in mind, what can Futarchy offer? So first, let's talk about Futarchy. What is this, and why is this interesting, if at all? So to talk about Futarchies, we have to talk about prediction markets. So the way prediction markets work, you ask a question. It's some question that gets resolved in the create a set of assets related to that question, and these assets get traded somewhere, and their price kind of forms a signal, a forecast about the resolution of the question in the future, if you will. That's kind of the basic operating principle of a prediction market. So you can have markets about decision that will be made. For example, will Corporation X appoint Alice as a CEO by the end of August? You pose this question. This question has two answers, yes or no, and kind of you create two shares, or two types of assets that represent the results of this question, and sell these assets on the open market, and price roughly forecasts the likelihood of a outcome of an event. You can have markets about goals. So for example, here I have, in the last slide, I had something called a categorical market. Here I'm using a scalar market as an example. So like you can define the range for some value that you want to measure at a point in time. For example, Corporation X's stock price, and you can buy and sell assets correlated to these sort of endpoints on the open market, and resolve a market in a way that causes the forecast to be about an expected value instead of just a probability. So this is something possible with prediction market as well. So there is something called combinatorial markets, where you individual markets and you combine them. So in a way, you can take the market about Alice becoming CEO and the market about the stock price, and you combine them to get a market with four kind of assets associated with this combined market. These assets pay out in the event that, for example, Alice gets appointed and the price is low, or Alice gets appointed and the price is high. So kind of if you know a bit about joint probability distributions, you could kind of see a joint probability distribution or something like that from this. But of course, like I also mentioned the last slide, that there are you could also kind of forecast expected values. And so the way to interpret, for example, a combined market of this form could be in the following way. You get the prices for yes and low and yes and high, and you can use these prices to forecast a sort of conditional expected value. So an expected value of the stock price if Alice gets appointed, and vice versa, the expected stock price if Alice does not get appointed. So this isn't necessarily one that can, this is not necessarily a mechanism kind of reveal causal relationships, but if there is a causal relationship, then this method can kind of tease out how strong the causal, how much attention should be paid to it, for example. So there are some manners of control from corporations that wouldn't be available to DAOs in a simplified form. And so this is where futarchy might be able to offer some value. We're not even just futarchy, but for example, just signaling markets. So I want to make a distinction between signal, these sort of markets that I mentioned before, and futarchy, where you take these signals and actually enforce an action upon those signaling markets. So you can have like sort of signaling market, just having that as a public resource, using it as a consultation thing, or you could actually code it up to be hardwired into the decision process itself, in which case you would have a full futarchy. But just a distinction I want to make. So right now, in my mind, my conception of DAOs is you kind of have these simple DAOs, you buy into them, you get a token, they're proposals, and you kind of have one dimension of like control of a proposal. You could boost that proposal if you like it, and you can oppose that proposal if you dislike it. And what is often meant by skin in a game with these proposals is like you put some of your governance token on it. And kind of if everybody agrees and like they're like, yeah, this proposal should go through, then anybody who didn't agree with you, their tokens sort of get, you sort of accumulate their tokens as well. And also on the other side, if you oppose unpopular proposals, you also get a payout. So one thing I want to note about this setup is you're playing kind of two games at the same time. You're on one hand thinking, hey, this proposal is a good thing. And on the other hand, you're thinking, hey, do I think this proposal will succeed? And kind of you're incentivized to boost proposals that you like, that you also think will succeed. Because if you boost proposals that you like but that are unpopular, there's a very, in your view, you would probably think, well, I might lose my governance power over this. It might not be worth it. So this is what I want to highlight, is kind of you're only incentivized to do things if your values match your scenario. So before we go further, I want to this is maybe a source of a lot of criticism about markets, is that values are really complicated. And if you're really thinking about it, you know, like I guess on a philosophical level, but on a simple level, you could just say, well, maybe I value certain things, like I value revenue for my business, or I value not having a hurricane in my hometown, or something like that. And you might say, well, on the other hand, you might say, what's going to happen? So that's you're predicting what's going to happen with DAO, for example. Like, I don't think a lot of people like that proposal. Everyone likes that proposal, and so what futarchy or what signaling markets let you do is kind of separate these two domains. Like, you can talk about, on the one hand, what you think would be good for the organization. On the other hand, what an organization is likely to do. And so with a futarchy, you can sort of warn about, instead of just boosting and opposing, which is also available in sort of this setup by buying and selling certain assets. You can also warn about that you dislike, but everybody else seems to agree with. Or you could direct attentions to proposals you think would be good for some set of values, but you think would fail in the proposal process anyway. So here you have kind of more degrees of control, or more incentivized actions available to take. So this is kind of all abstract, and I just want to try and get through a concrete way to make this happen on the blockchain, you know, because we're all on the blockchain here. So with the conditional tokens, one way to make this sort of happen, let me just try and go through a set of transactions that would cause this to be possible, is you would prepare a condition about some decision that's going to be made in the future. So to prepare a condition, you have to ask a question, and you have to designate an oracle to report on that question at some point in the future. So here's our user calling prepare condition on the conditional token, and saying, all right, we got this decision to make this person or this account the oracle for the decision. You also want to prepare a condition, this goal that you want to see achieved by the organization. Maybe some metric or something. So you can ask a question like, what will the revenue be? And you could designate some other oracle account to report the value of this goal at the end of this whole thing. And so now we got two conditions on the conditional tokens contract. You want to pick some collateral token to back the markets. So, for example, you could actually choose the DAO token, and this would work with the conditional tokens. The DAO token, ERC20 token. It's really an ERC20 token. You could choose some stable coin. You can choose WETH. Those are just other examples. But one thing I do want to note is these tokens effectively kind of also carry with them communities. So this choice is not entirely our. Like, for example, if you choose it, you'd probably be effectively locking in control of this futarchy thing to members of, which may or may not be your preference. And on the other hand, depending on what stable groups with different philosophies, because you all know stablecoin politics isn't entirely straightforward sometimes. So yeah. There's so after we choose some titular user here, and they just need to make a couple calls. They call approve to the collateral token, giving it the conditional tokens contract the as the kind of spender, and it's a common practice so that when our user calls split position, our user creates these conditional tokens that, for example, could pay out depending on the outcome of appointment or something like that. So like maybe we have like 3 choices for CEO. It's Alice, Bob, and Carol, and we take this collateral token, transfer it to the conditional tokens, these conditional tokens. And sort of these conditional tokens belong as part of the conditional tokens contract because it's an ERC 1155 multi-token, and this user is now like the holder of these tokens in this scenario. And this is really any account can do this sort of thing and create conditional tokens once the conditions have been prepared. You can then split these conditional tokens another condition. So this is sort of the mechanism by which we combinatorial prediction markets, which is what can be used for signaling. And so these for example, the Bob conditional tokens could call split position again with some different parameters, including the other condition as a parameter, and you split this token into Bob and the stock price is low and Bob and the stock price is high. So kind of these conditional tokens that represent results from multiple conditions. And once you get all these conditional tokens, you could trade them on some exchange. And if these exchanges offer price signals, then these signals kind of can be used to determine, for example, the expected value of a stock. In the scenario that Alice, Bob gets appointed, Carol gets appointed, these signals can be used to guide, or in the case of futarchy, even contract, like there's an on-chain source for these signals to make these signals actually determine the choice as made. So that's futarchy with conditional tokens, I guess. You can learn more about conditional tokens on the docs on the Gnosis, so it's the URL for that. If you have any specific questions about the contract, we have a Discord servers that I'm on. So I believe the prediction markets channel, I get a few of those questions, or like, you can post them there. And we got Bounty, which I guess I'd let Warren talk about. And
well, I see Graham's in the chat here as well.
Hey, Graham. Yeah, so yeah, we got bounty and yeah, maybe I should have looked at that first. But yeah, that's the end of my presentation. This part of the presentation. I guess maybe we should just go.
Yeah, I can chat about the bounty real quick since Graham didn't unmute. Essentially, there's a 3,000 DAI bounty up, 2,000 DAI for first place, and 1,000 DAI for second place, as determined by the Gnosis team. And it's essentially a bounty to kind of explore, use, and build something on the conditional tokens framework. The kind of criteria there is that the application must, at a minimum, facilitate the creation or transfer of positions which are derived from no less than 2 conditions. And we're basically looking for things that kind of hint at what Alan just described. So either kind of conditional signaling or conditional or essentially futarchy. So a couple of ideas that might help is or kind of prompts, I guess, are things like an app to allow the members of a DAO to create or use kind of existing prediction markets to help inform their decisions, or an app, say like using Colony as an example, create an extension for the Colony contract that uses futarchy to make payments only if their predicted return ROI is greater than some threshold. You can also do things like what Deacon described earlier, where you may have the Moloch minion participating in prediction markets, or you may have the Moloch minion kind of imposing or kind of putting a kind of futarchy layer on top of Moloch's decision-making process, or really anything else that is kind of DAO related that involves multiple conditions using the conditional tokens framework.
Awesome. Thank you guys for doing this. If there are any questions, now is the time to ask them. Questions, comments, anything goes. Nothing.
I have one.
Yeah, please go.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I've been following a little bit the conditional tokens strategy of Gnosis. I think for a year, the idea has been there for a while. I wonder if you have already run experiments with it, and how did they go or are ongoing?
Yes, we have. So back when the conditional tokens first was being drafted up, there was a demo application internally at Gnosis that actually had 3 conditions. So it wasn't wired up to any futarchy or anything, but I believe there was some. It was around kind of. I can't remember the exact event, but it was around something happening with MakerDAO. So we actually sort of created 3 different questions about MakerDAO, and we also had sort of on-chain Oracle adapters that ported information from MakerDAO to the interface, or like to the conditional tokens, so that kind of it was a completely decentralized Oracle in some sense. Like it relied on data. Well, that wasn't the pertinent part of the experiment, but like basically this there was a rudimentary interface to try and work out like how to trade on these conditional markets, but I believe one of the things we found was that it is pretty tricky to actually design an interface for trading on conditional markets. And so I think I don't remember all the insights we had from trying to wrangle the UX around that, but like yeah.
Hey guys. So yeah, to your question regarding like what we've done internally, we ran a series of prediction markets on basically Gnosis teams hitting certain KPIs. Where that was like most interesting was around deadlines. So like when is stuff gonna launch? And why that was quite cool is because often, I guess, you can be quite optimistic, especially if you're like in charge of a product. But everyone who's working on it is like, nah, no way in hell we're going to launch by X date. We're actually going to launch on 2 months later. And so that was quite useful just internally with regards to like stakeholder management. With regards to the UI UX, yeah, the first version of this, we had 3 different conditions, which was just a hell of a lot of like complexity to introduce. We do have designs and prototypes to illustrate a much simpler version, and that simpler version just breaks down the problem into 2 parts: an event and a consequence. So the event will be a categorical market, like will something happen? Yes, no. And then the consequence is normally a scalar market. So you're kind of measuring or predicting a metric. So will something happen? Yes, no. And then what will the effect be on the token price? But a bit more nuanced than say, will it go above or below a certain amount? You can actually get like a precise forecast. If you're interested, I'm more than happy to share the designs and share the prototypes.
Nice, thank you. I would also like to know if there are other projects right now building on top of it, and if Gnosis have some sort of program to help these projects, like grants or just support.
So at the moment, okay, there was Site, but that's still very much in beta. It's built on the CT framework. Then we've got Omen, which is also built on the conditional tokens framework, and that's live. And then we've got Polymarket, which is also in beta. And yeah, they're all using the framework as the foundation. With regards to support, we've got the Gecko Grants program. And that's basically if you're building anything on whether it's the safe contracts, the conditional token contracts, or even the Gnosis protocol contracts, I mean, that's like kind of a win-win. So we're more than happy to help out.
Thanks, great.
Thanks for your question.
All right. Well, if there are no other questions, then we can end it right here.
Awesome. Thanks for the presentation, Alan and Graham. Appreciate it. Someone asked if the slides will be made available. That would be awesome if you could post those in the workshop discussion, Alan.
Sure, no problem.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. And I'll give you guys all the helper tag too, so that if people do have questions, they can ping you. And we appreciate you coming and sharing.
Thanks, Yeller.
All right. Happy hacking.
Cheers.
Well,